Before we get into today's episode, a quick word from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Service Charge Pro, the platform helping housing providers fix messy, spreadsheet-driven service charge processes. We built Service Charge Pro to make accuracy simpler, compliance easier, and help rebuild resident trust. If you're a housing provider and service charges are a pain, check out Service Charge Pro. Link in the comments below. Right, on to the episode. Welcome to episode 2 of The Housing Shift. With me today I have Dan Oehlman from Ad Esse Service Charges. Dan, welcome to the pod.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
We've got to know each other over the past couple of years, kindred spirits around service charges, both really passionate about talking about service charges and solving the many problems that exist out there in the housing sector. We're not going to cover them all today, but yeah, we're certainly going to get deep into a particular area. But before we start, Dan, could you give everyone a little bit of a background on who you are and what you've been up to in housing and your angle with service charges?
Sure, no problem. So my name's Dan. I'm Director of Service Charges at Ad Esse, and I've been working in the sector now for 20 years. So a good long time. I certainly looked a lot younger when I started. And most of that has been spent working with service charges, either when I was working in income recovery or then later actually service charge calculation and running service charge teams. And about 3 years ago, we decided that there were a lot of challenges in the sector, a lot of problems the sector was facing into. And we felt that there was an opportunity that I could come in and help. So we set up Ad Esse Service Charges as an arm of the wider Ad Esse brand. And it's been a wonderful 3 and a bit years now. Incredibly tiring, lots to do, barely scratching the surface in a lot of ways, but making improvements and definitely seeing the benefit of that. And ultimately, playing on the things that I feel really passionate about. I do feel really passionate about transparency of service charges. It should be easy to understand what you're being charged for and why you're being charged for it. It's not complex. It's not, service charges can be complicated, but it's not complex. And you really do, it's absolutely ultimately achievable to make service charges simple to understand. And that's where we want to get to.
Thanks, Anne. The whole point there about it not being complex and being complicated is something that you mentioned at the NLG Service Charge Conference recently when you did your talk. And that's something that's always struck me with service charges from my first encounter with it. And it's always baffled me and then just drove me a bit insane. And here we both are. Pinned to service charges for life. Yeah, I know. So today's topic, as I said, we're not going to cover everything to do with service charges. So we'll be here for about 3 years on this podcast, going grayer than we have before. So the title of the episode is "Cracking the Service Charge Headache: Why Accuracy Matters More Than Ever." So with a focus around accuracy, I mean, this has always mattered, as you said in your introduction, and something that we both understood in our experiences of service charges. But can you help us understand why now this is such a hot topic?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a hot topic and I think there's lots of interconnected reasons here. So I think. Firstly, I think over the last 10, 15 years in particular, but even perhaps more so when we start to think about some of the tools that are available now, like ChatGPT, customers are increasingly aware of their rights and what is correct. And that naturally brings challenge and naturally is generating a level of dissatisfaction when they challenge and they find out that their charges are wrong. I think there's the role of the housing ombudsman. We've always had, FTT or, before that, the LVT. But the Housing Ombudsman has wider jurisdiction to pick on things that don't relate to what an FTT can pick up, and obviously work around fixed service charges, which has always been a sort of, basically sort of not a lot there to support you as a customer in terms of challenge. The media's played a massive part. It feels like a weekly, if not, bi-weekly, occurrence that we're seeing an article on the BBC, in the Guardian, in newspapers everywhere, relating to dissatisfaction around service charges. Now people read that and it paints their picture of what they believe their service charges should or shouldn't be. So even where service charges are accurate, people are questioning them more and more and more, because they're seeing the dissatisfaction across the sector in service charges. Probably add that we're in a period of some of the biggest legislation change in 40 years. And with that, I think it's raising the profile within the news, but it's also raising the profile within the sector. So the sector is thinking about accuracy far more. The challenges that organisations may face into for inaccuracy, and that might not just be financial inaccuracy, it might be inaccuracy in relation to following terms of lease. There's some real financial punitive measures within the new legislation that would really impact organisations if they fell foul of them. And I think there's another element, which is the pressure groups. So we're seeing, and we have seen for a number of years now, groups like SHAC really picking up on service charges, using the term service charge abuse, and also creating a stir within government around that. I've seen the G15 and the NHF respond as part of that to those questions about whether people are effectively being, habitually and deliberately overcharged. But probably the biggest reason is because we keep getting it wrong. all of the other bits sort of go away to a degree if we just start getting it, right more often. And that's not to say they go away immediately. We know that there's, it's going to take time for people to come back on side with service charges. That's on us as a sector to explain that to the customer in a way that's relatable to them and relatable to their development. And I see a lot of the work that we do being very generic. We work at mass volume as a sector. That doesn't work very well in service charges. A customer is only interested in the micro of their development. They're not interested in the macro of your whole organisation. So we have to be really aware of that. But ultimately, if we're not going to get it right, then it's going to continue being that hot topic, because we're still going to be having the same conversations around accuracy.
That's so true, isn't it? I see the same problems that existed 10 plus years ago when I had my first interaction with service charges, unfortunately do still exist across the sector. And if you're living in a property where your landlord has consistently got your service charge bill incorrect over that period of time, of course there's going to be an uproar about it. Of course you're going to complain about it, and that's going to create this focus. I do feel like there is definitely a split between the sort of deserved focus and the regulations coming in are I think are justified, and I think it's good that residents have a greater voice in general, and that's supported by the methods of communication that we have available, etc. But I do also feel like there is this narrative which I find infuriating, where service charges is some sort of profiteering exercise, and it's so dangerous because there is a conversation to be had, as we have had many a time, about how organizations are spending money, but they spend the money and then they have to recoup it, and if they don't, they lose it, and we know there's widespread loss across the sector. So it really isn't helpful when you have, especially in the media, these kind of stories.
Yeah, and look, I mean, um, I agree with that. I think that there is definitely elements of that. I think, again, a lot of that is self-inflicted. Um, so again, you talked about the gap. We know that the sector in the macro has it's about £600 million gap between
Mm,
service charge income and service charge expenditure. Um, and ultimately, that's not good enough. We can't be collecting 75p in every pound that we're spending in service charges. That's not appropriate. And ultimately, we have to recognise that as an organisation that comes off our bottom line. Now, we're all social purpose organisations. We have a social benefit that we provide in terms of building homes and providing care and support and what we do for communities. So any money that we're not recovering is impacting our ability to do that. So it is hugely important that we get those things right. What I always argue is recovery is a two-way street. And I see so many organisations raising their service charges to try and meet their expenditure and never really digging down as to whether what they're paying for is needed, is appropriate, is doing the things that the customers and the residents actually want. So it's that conversation has to be two-way. It can't be oh well, I'm just going to charge everybody maximum, and then it is what it is, which unfortunately is something I hear far too often. Actually, have those conversations with your customers. Have those conversations around you've got the right services delivering at the right frequency with the right scope that the customer wants, and then deliver those at a cost that the customer is aware of and understands. And then you start to close that transparency gap, right? You start to people to understand and go, okay, I know what I'm paying for. I agreed to what was being paid for. So I know that cost coming through is true. Is it easy? No, but it's by far easier than dealing with the fallout of actually overcharging people. And or very high service charges, whether they're accurate or not. It's really important that we start to make property management, and this is service charges is a part of that, but we start to make property management that peer-to-peer relationship rather than that historical parent-child relationship that we've seen in the sector for so many years. And when we start to see that, I think then we'll start to see that people feel listened to, they feel heard, they feel like they have some level of control. And that's entirely appropriate in the management of property. And it's not a conversation that I think we have enough of.
absolutely. So you touched on the under recovery across the sector. In terms of other consequences of service charge inaccuracy, could you help us understand whether that's for the landlords, whether it's for the residents, whether it's for the staff? What are the impacts across the sector?
We have to remember that a service charge cycle, we may get two normal opportunities within a year to communicate with that resident. So we're communicating when we do the estimates, and we're communicating when we do the actuals. In that cycle, if you get one of those wrong, it's going to take 2 or 3 times for you to get people to go, okay, well, it's accurate now. It was inaccurate, but I've now seen 2 or 3 instances where it is accurate. So I'm comfortable that they know what they're doing. That could take 2 years, 3 years. It could take a really, really long time before you start getting these sort of, it's September, so I'm already sending through my Section 22 requests in advance because I want to be able to see the invoices, because I don't believe, I haven't even received the statement yet, and I already feel that the charges won't be correct. That takes a long time to break down, and we have to be patient with that, and we have to recognise the part we play in that. And I think if we do, then we'll be in a better place. But customer dissatisfaction is naturally a challenge, and because of that, it has a long tail. So we have to be aware of that. I think very often when we talk about accuracy and customer dissatisfaction, accuracy can be for lots of different reasons. It can be that we included the wrong costs. We included a cost for another block. We included too many of a certain cost. We double counted something. A lot of the time, the inaccuracy is actually around services that perhaps haven't been provided to an adequate standard. And actually, it's less about service charge calculation and more about service provision. And I always say service charges are a byproduct of service. You have to get the service right. And that's a huge part of that customer's expectation. So if, for example, services are not being performed to a decent standard, accuracy will always come into question because they don't believe they're getting the service that they're paying for. So it might not be accuracy to us as a housing association, but it's absolutely accuracy in terms of what the customer expectation is. So we have to recognise that. We talked a little bit about the consequences for the organisations in terms of failure to recover and what that means. You know, the impact that has on their ability to spend doing the things that they're really ultimately set up to achieve. But I think it goes beyond that. I think there is a pain around service charges that the sector has known for a really, really long time. And I always describe it as it's been put in the too hard to do box. And as a sector, they sort of occasionally sort of look in the box and go, we should really do something about the service charge problem. And then they take it out and they go, oh, it's really complicated. Let's put it away and we'll do something nice instead. And we just can't keep doing this. We can't keep ignoring that there is a challenge here. We need to go and tackle it as a sector, as individual organisations. And there is a real opportunity around new legislation coming in to really do that with, future-proofed and with the future in mind and with the customer in mind. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity there. But at the moment, organisations feel very flat about service charges. They wish they didn't exist. They wish they didn't have to deal with them. And there's a lack of understanding across many people who work in these organisations around what service charges are there to achieve. They just see the pain, they don't see the reason and the purpose. So explaining the purpose and how their role links into that purpose is a huge part of getting that right. I think the other consequence for organisations and for the sector more widely is the reputational damage. These newspaper articles, the reports from pressure groups, the government involvement, the ombudsman, it all comes at a price to the wider reputation of our sector. And we have to recognise that has a cumulative effect. It has a cumulative effect in terms of how we're trusted as a sector. It has a cumulative effect on whether our products are bought and purchased by customers who may be seeing this and thinking, maybe I don't want to look at properties that are developed by housing associations. Maybe I want to stick with private. I think there's also a reputational damage piece really around attracting talent into the sector. I think that's really important. We do have a skills shortage in service charges, and it's really difficult to attract talent when it's an area that's constantly under the spotlight. And ultimately, it could go as far down as people making really big decisions around how the sector is funded, around how the sector is perceived as part of a wider social purpose and a wider social solution that housing plays in the success of the country. So we shouldn't underestimate the importance and the consequence of this. because it's quite significant.
Thank you, Dan. I mean, it was great that we talked about micro and macro before in terms of how the residents, see things and how organizations see things. But it's clear that there are some really big issues at both the micro and the macro level. It was really good to make that distinction. Something I've never thought about before. How you framed accuracy as not just calculating things correctly in a sort of calculation perspective, but how the resident sees it, and that's so true. You're absolutely right. Like from the residents that we've spoken to in terms of what they want more out of their service charge statements or bills, a lot of the conversation did come to how the service was delivered. And I think if you go back to your point about changing the relationship between housing providers and the residents, I feel if that happens and they're more involved in the delivery of the services and there's more opportunity for them to feedback throughout the year as the service is being delivered, that's better for the organizations because they are getting a constant feedback loop with the people who are receiving the services that they are commissioning to happen on their properties, on their blocks, on their estates. But it will also front end a lot of the queries that they're going to expect when the bills go out, and there can be conversations well in advance. They can be proactive with things. So, it's such a win-win situation. Really, 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 really advocate for it. You also touched you mentioned about the 600 million, about that, from the regulator of social housing's global accounts, and not all of that is recoverable as we know, but a massive portion of that is being lost. If you ask me, a lot of that's down to systems, obviously. But the key for me is that there is so much there's so much going on in housing, especially around damp and mold and fire safety, electricity. There's real human life risk, and there's really really scary things that are out there. The service charges is kind of seen as like we can sort of live with it because of the impact of the other issues. But what's screaming out at me, and I know it is for you, is if we don't lose all this money as a sector, we get to then invest in mitigations for those problems, and we get to make people's homes safer, and we get to support communities better. And it just, I know it frustrates you as much as it is to me. So we've talked a lot about the residents and the organisations as a whole. And what impact do you think, from your experiences, is having on the staff? I mean, I've seen a lot of impact on service charge teams as you have. Could you share with us some of the stuff you've seen?
I think they find it. In fact, I know from the conversations that I have, and having done it in myself, it's an incredibly lonely place. The organisation doesn't really understand what you're doing or why you're doing it or why you're coming to ask them about certain things. The customer doesn't like you because ultimately you're charging them money, and it's a very solo pursuit. It can be a lot of late nights. It can be a lot of pressure. We have a legislatively driven calendar, and this drives pressure points within our year, so that those are immovable. So those pressure points will continue to exist whether you decide that you're going to stop doing something or start doing something. It's still going to be, if you're on a April to March accounting year, it's still going to be September. At the end of September, you need to get those actuals out the door. And while there are obviously measures that you can extend by, you don't want to utilise those. You want to be getting those accounts out. So there's a huge amount of pressure in the team. It can feel very lonely, and there's a lack of understanding across your organisation from your colleagues about what you actually do. So yes, it's hugely challenging. I think the other thing I would say is that I always describe service charge teams as being as near to the customer for the organisation as anywhere else in your business, because you are a customer of so many of the other business processes that go on. You're right at the end, you're seeing the cost, but the accuracy of that cost is completely sort of at the behest of those individual teams or individuals within those teams and the accuracy by which they do things. So very often you get a lot of data that's really poor quality coming through, and a lot of information. Sometimes it's needle in a haystack stuff, right? You're sort of searching through for valid costs, lots of mispostings, lots of costs going to the wrong places. And ultimately, it comes down in a lot of ways to an education piece. But for the service charge team, they're the customer of all of that. And very often they feel a responsibility as almost like a gatekeeper for the accuracy of what goes out the door. But they're in no way responsible for the quality of the information that they receive. So they're stuck in this dichotomy of, we need this to be accurate for the customer, but we also need to maximize the organization's recovery, because that's important too. And they're stuck between a rock and a hard place with very, very poor information and poor data, trying to square that circle. And that's a very lonely place to be.
Absolutely. I've seen so many service charge people across the organizations I've worked with who carry that, as you said, and then another thing I've seen is that pretty much every interaction they have with the residents is going to be questioning service charges or some sort of complaint about them. No one's emailing in saying, "Thank you for getting my statement correct. I really appreciate it."
When we set up our LinkedIn showcase page for Ad Esse service charges, we deliberately took a view that it was going to be a page not necessarily about promoting what we do, but it was about building a community. And the reason for that was exactly that. We wanted people to feel like that the challenges that they're going through are not, unique to them. They're not in that bubble. There is a whole sector out here feeling the same pain, that there are solutions, and that we can try and find a way of meeting that collectively. And a lot of the feedback I get when I speak to people is that they feel really reassured by that, that they're not facing into it. It's not an organisation problem. It's a sector problem, and that there's people out there trying to make a difference. And I think people recognise that, and that's helpful.
Okay, so Dan, in your role at Ad Esse, you help a lot of organizations with their service charges. What's some advice that you can give to service charge teams, service charge professionals out there, organizations? If you were going to say, okay, here's how you can improve your accuracy.
Firstly, 100% accuracy and 100% recovery are definitely two different things, because you can be 100% accurate and not recover 100% of the cost. So recognizing that as an organization is important. You're always going to have a degree of service charge loss, whether that's due to the type of property, the restrictions within your leases, or commercial decisions that you've made as an organization. But that doesn't mean it's not 100% accurate. So I think there's always worth defining that. Changing service charges is hard. You've heard me use the analogy. It's like fixing a plane in midair, because the service charge cycle never stops. You can't postpone one of those key pressure points within a year. So you don't have the time or the chance to really do the improvement work that you would like to do. But there are things that you can do which don't need a consultant, don't need people to come in and help with, that will make a difference in your organization. I think the first one I would choose is around not perpetuating the organization of silos that already exist. So if you're a leader of a service charge team, or even if you're not, and you just recognize this within your organizations, go and talk to other teams. Get invites to their team meetings. Explain to them why service charges are important, what service charge recovery means, what service charge accuracy means. Explain to them the role that they play in getting service charges right. And we see it so often that it's those teams who are coding an invoice or raising a repair. They see it in their silo. They see, well, I'm raising a repair, so my responsibility in that is to raise that repair quickly and get somebody out there as quickly as possible to do that repair. Absolutely. But that doesn't account for if that repair is over £250 per unit in cost. And we're going to see a loss because we haven't done an adequate Section 20 consultation around that. Educating people into the why, which might feel completely at odds with their own job purpose, is really important, because where you can make it about them is you can tell them, well, it's part of the organisation's purpose, because if we don't recover that money, we can't do the good that we're set up. Every organisation has got a variation of a purpose statement or a vision that is the same. It's about providing homes to communities, helping people to live well, whatever it might be. And ultimately, you can't do those good things if you don't have the money to do it. So it's really important that we get that message across to people that their job purpose might be one thing, but their organisational purpose that they all play to is something else. And that you can do that if you're going and having these conversations with teams. And we've seen it be so effective in organisations that they're doing that. I think the other thing you can do is recognise where the organisation is at and put in controls and measures where failure might exist. If you know that there's a particular challenge around a certain type of coding, if there's a particular challenge around a certain type of cost, perhaps there's a particular challenge around customer satisfaction on a particular problem, put in measures and controls that are associated to that. Make sure that you have information that relates to that. Make sure the controls are in place so that you can weed out the inaccuracy. So I think that's a really important part of getting it right. It's not just, obviously put in a control, stop it from happening, make sure that you're aware that that's not filtering down into customers. But measure it. Measure where you have those challenges, and then feed that back to the area of the business that's perpetuating that. It's not about blame. It's never about blame. It's just about trying to get it right. I think the other thing I would say is that if you are in a position to systemize, then great. And I would say that, especially when you're looking at acting at scale, systems are a really important part of getting that right. I would always urge organisations to really think about their system readiness. Do you have the right processes in place? I often talk about systems helping do the wrong things more quickly. and they have the power to do that if they're not set up right, or the processes that sit behind them don't support its use. But there's a lot of good about systems that can help reduce the inaccuracy, reduce the human error element of getting service charges right, which is a really important part of that. But it's always a question of when, and I've seen organisations move to systems too quickly and fail. I've seen organisations wait and take systems and do really, really well. Equally, I've seen organisations try and do things at the same time. And in some respects, that can work as well, because sometimes it requires a system to encourage people to make the change. And I've also seen that too, where people go, oh, we're going to have a system, we now need to change our processes. And it gives them the opportunity to look at that. But you really can't get a system working well if it's not delivering the process in the order you need it to. So that's a really, I think, important part of the wider solution of getting it right. So if you're ready to systemize, I would say it's a really good opportunity now to go, okay, let's see what's available, let's see what's out there.
Really, really, really interesting points, and you're absolutely right. From my point of view, as an owner of a company that has a service charge system, the people side of things, the process, the data side of things are crucial. And we don't want to be automating chaos, because then we'll just end up with a bigger mess than you're in the first place. That being said, what I advocate is implementing in chunks and delivering value sooner, and avoiding these kind of projects where it's like, let's start now and in 12 months we'll have everything, and just hope that everything goes well at once, and just breaking things down so you can learn throughout the cycle. You can, you talked about that scenario where you've got a system and you've got processes alongside it that you're refining, and you can get all that learning, and that happens better when it's in increments and you are iteratively developing on what you've got, and what you're trying to progress. It was interesting you said about the teams speaking to other teams, and something that I've seen happen so often is it just seems like such a big challenge that it's almost paralyzing, and people don't do anything. Whereas I've seen, leaders in home ownership and service charges who just go, I'm just going to go talk to development and build up a relationship with them, and then they'll go to repairs and then do that, and they'll just take the first step, and that's so important in this, because it can seem overwhelming, and in some ways it is, but you need to just start somewhere, and then things will fall into place. Okay, so on to our last question, tradition we have on the pod. So I'm going to give you a magic wand now and ask if you can wave your magic wand and implement one thing that's going to solve service charge inaccuracy across the sector today, what would it be?
A set data standard that is applied across all organisations, that feeds through and works in every scenario. That would be wonderful. I could definitely think of a few around around process and having set process, or set legislation and case law that it doesn't move the goalposts every now and again. But do you know what? I think the one thing I would say that I would, if I had that magic wand, it would be universal education on service charges across the sector and with the customers as well. I think if we get to a place where customers and everybody who works in a housing association understands the purpose of service charges, why they're there, what they're trying to achieve, what they're doing, so many of the problems and challenges around data, around process, would resolve itself, or at least get challenged, and the challenges would be more successful, because the people they'd be speaking to would understand the reason why that challenge is being made, and why the problem exists. So for me, it would be education across everybody within the sector around understanding why service charges are important, how they play to your organisational purpose, and what you can what you need to do within your role to support the accuracy of service charges. Yeah, and that's not just and I would say that's not just frontline teams. I think the education goes right to exec teams and board level as well. I think there are gaps at senior levels around an understanding of service charges. And if you're an organisation who understands service charges, I can tell you now you're much more likely to be good at them. And that includes execs asking the right questions, boards questioning the right things. It's hugely important that every level of an organisation understands.
Okay, great. Dan, thank you very much for joining me this episode. It's been an absolute pleasure. I feel like we could have talked for hours longer, but we thought we'd spare the viewers, spare the listeners. Okay, have a good rest of your day, mate.